and welcome to Scrapbooking Station. In this video, it's a One Sheet Wonder. So I'm going to create a set using my schematic, and then we're going to create another set using the same schematic. Then I'm going to tweak it a little bit for my third set. So it's a quick way of dividing up your A4, in this case cardstock. Now I want to apologize really quick because my cameraman, that would be me, had a fuzzy start, and so after about 5 minutes things clear up. So I'm going to put the camera over my shoulder and we'll get started. To begin with, One Sheet Wonder, what it is, it's a way of using your cardstock. In this case, I'm going to use a piece of A4. And I've got an insert here only because the glare was so much that I couldn't get in focus. But what you want to start off with is a map. And in this case, this map is good for kind of light bordered cardstock, or any map is actually good for an overall pattern. But I'm going to use something from Hunky Dory to begin with. And like I said, this is going to be like an A4 map. And so this is half scale, and I'm going to take a close-up of this photo afterwards. But the first thing you want to do is divide up your A4 cardstock. And so, first cut, and that's why this is a 1. I want to go 5 1/4 inches and then cut across. Then once I have this half, I want to go 5 1/4 inches from the bottom and cut across. When I have this half, I want to come up 4 inches and cut across. And what I'm going to end up with is 4 pieces. So I'm going to do that on my caterpillar with the real adorable scoreable, and then I'll be back. Now I want to apologize for the glare, but this is how this turned out. So I've got this, and now this comes from Hunky Dory, and it is the Twilight Kingdom, and it always comes with a sheet of toppers. But the first thing I want to look at, well, I already got orientation. So this one I know is going to be across this way, and this one is going to be across this way. But note also that I've got this piece that can go any direction, and this piece can go in any direction also, but I think this would be great to add additional embellishments. So I'm planning to make a set of 3 cards with this collection, and I've already picked out some toppers. So I want my big topper to kind of come across in here somewhere. So I know that piece is going to roll. Then I've got this one. And I'm concerned about moons here because there's a lot of moons. And so I don't want to have 2 moons on my card front. And then lastly, I've got this piece. And like I said, I know it can go in any direction. So probably something like this. And my next step is going to be to decide on the card sizes. I think this one, I'm just going to stick with a 5 1/2 square card. And so I'm going to make that card base. This guy, it's 4 inches, so I'll probably go 4 1/2 by 6 1/2. Actually, I can go 7. So 4 1/2 by 7 for this piece. And this one, I'm going to make a 5 by 7. So I'm going to have to do something with this because that piece that you had left over here is 4 1/4 inches. So let me get some of those materials together. Yes, and it goes very quick, and that's the whole idea, because instead of dealing with an entire piece of cardstock, what you're dealing with this mat is actually 3 independent projects, and know that you've got this piece, like I said, to add additional embellishments, sentiments, whatever else you want to do to kind of coordinate with this cardstock. I know I'm going to bring in black. I could bring in silver. There's actually a little bit of silver highlights in here. So again, let me just step back a bit, bring in my base cards and some mats. At this point in this process, my workspace is getting pretty muddled up. And so, well, the first thing I'm noticing is that I've got arches. I've got some arches die cuts, and I'm going to use those. The other thing is, this is a bone pile. I call it the bone pile. And so I got that leftover piece of adorable scoreable. I've got a frame that I'm not using in any of these designs so far. And I've got some additional base white card because there's white in here. I've got my white card base, and so I might want to introduce some white. But the first thing I want to do is, like I said, I kind of cut all the base cards. And so in this case, I've got a 4 1/2 by 7, and this one I've got a 5 by 7. And so I'm going to put those aside because what the great thing about this technique is now you're just focused on this one piece of adorable scoreable. And so the first thing I'm noticing is that I can use whatever's behind here somewhere else in my other two projects. And so I'm going to gut that because I know this topper is going to come over it. I want the scale of my arches to be the same, and so I'm going to use the same set of nested dies to kind of trim this piece where I want it on this card front. And this way I can use, again, this piece on one of my other two designs. Might use some of this border. So let me get some black, because I'm going to mat this in black, and then I'll be back to work on my first piece of the set. Okay, once I get here, my piece is almost done. And gutting really depends on the sturdiness or the weight of your cardstock. Those of you who own Hunky Dory know that it is about 135 pounds for the Adorable Scorball, and even the toppers are really thick, so I'm not worried about cutting this piece out. But I'm going to bring in my white also, since I'm using nested arches. May as well do that and make the most of it. Notice also that this boneyard is, or bone pile, is kind of increasing, and so these are all things that I can use in my other two projects. So let me assemble this. I'm going to introduce some embellishments, and then I'll be back with the first finished piece. And very quickly, I came up with my first finished piece. And so I took this panel out of my boneyard and cut some tattered lace butterflies, because you can see butterflies in here. And I actually may overlay them in black, because I put these cut into the butterfly, and so I put those pieces back in there. But I'm going to find a piece of black coated cardstock to kind of finish that piece up. Took the photo ahead of time, but that is really pretty. And the reason I didn't put a sentiment on top is because this also comes with inserts. And so I have this piece that I cut out of an A4 that's going to go great into my 5.5. Okay, what I want to really quickly is move right into the second piece. So I'm going to work with that piece of 4-inch wide. It was almost by 6.5, just short. And so first thing I want to do is bring in my black border again. I'm going to bring in another piece of Adorable Scorball, and this is an ombre, but in those kind of lighter shades of green. Of course, I've got this piece from my first card, which I'm going to incorporate into this design. You know what? As long as I'm cutting, I'm going to cut out this base card as well, stick this on top, but now I've got this piece to use in something else. So my boneyard, I kind of take away and put back into it. So, again, gutting where I need, or where I can gut, because this, again, is Adorable Scorball, and you really don't need any weight underneath it. So let me put this second piece together, and then I'll be back. As I show you the second piece, what's great about this technique is that what you're not seeing is that the cards move together faster. That's because you've got a limited number of items you can use, and you're already familiar with what else works in your stash, like this butterfly die cut, like this arch, which was a leftover piece, but I could have done this with any arch. And then some other materials, like this case, I found a leftover piece of bow that would go really well with this piece. And then the inside, I want to be clever and say I did a 2-piece base, but actually what happened is when I put this on, I put it upside down. So I hate when that happens. But anyway, I chose to go ahead and use a different color cardstock to finish out the inside. And then another piece of that insert, and just put a little inset butterfly on the inside. So that's how that finished out. And kind of to my point, because for the last make, you've really only got a few things left. And so the first thing was that arch frame. Let me see if you can see that. It's just in the picture. But I divided it up. So now I've got this half circle, and I went ahead and backed it with some acetate that was kind of complementary to this collection. So I've got that piece. I took the two ends of my arch, put them together, and I'm going to put some sort of border element here. And then, like I said, I've just got really the one topper. I already know this ribbon works for me, and I've got that circle piece that was left over. So really quickly, going to mat and layer, put this together, and I'll be back. The last piece in this puzzle, and it's kind of like a puzzle because I'm going to fit these right back into that A4 sheet. And so I used a piece of leftover adorable scribble to create this sentiment. So I've got amazing. This is tattered lace dye. Divided that up. And then noticed I needed some weight down here, so added some crystals. And these I got from Amazon. So they're black crystal gems. They kind of sparkle a little bit. Another great thing about this technique is once I did that, I noticed, well, that's really good, really coordinates. So I started throwing some of these same gemstones on some of these other finished projects where I thought I needed them. So pop those up in the corner. You know, this one just scattered a couple across. And so another great reason to kind of do all three at the same time. The other great thing is that I've got this piece, which I will probably save with my collection to use somewhere else as embellishment stock. But then I've got these two pieces. And so if you've got a collection like Hunky Dory, you've got a set number of things that you can use, and they always give you an inspiration sheet, and I do love them. This one is right here, but they always are using the kind of premier piece of your cardstock. So this is kind of a way to make the most of these collections. Of course, the other thing is I tend to decorate envelopes. I had a serious leftover piece of insert, and so I just use those to do the flaps of my envelopes to go with this collection. Okay, I'm going to leave photos with that, and then we're going to take a look at some different materials and using this technique in a little bit of a different way. So what I'm going to start off with is, again, another piece of A4 cardstock. Or, actually, this is paperweight, so I'm limited as to what I can do with it, unless I back it, which I'm probably going to do. But well, first off, I'm noticing that I've got a couple borders here that go into the corners, which works with this map. And so, the other thing I'm noticing is that these corners, or even these borders, can really go in any direction. So this is going to be really versatile. And this collection comes from Paper Boutique. And with it, I've got toppers and I've got pattern papers. And these are in paper pads. But the other thing is that everything goes with everything. And it can be a little overwhelming. So this is a great way to kind of parcel that out. So the first thing I'm going to do is, again, take my map. And I cut my A4 sheet in the exact same way. But what I want to do now is you don't need to leave, because in that Hunky Dory example, all these panels were used exactly as is, meaning that I left them all in the same size and in the same kind of proportions. And so what I'm going to do first off is kind of take a look at this. I'm still going to decide on my card base size first, and then I'm going to separate them. Once I do that, I'll be back. So I'm back with my plan of attack. And so you saw the way I divided up each of these sections. And so let's talk about this piece first, because this is going to be a very large 5 by 8 inch card. And so I've divided up, first off, I trimmed off the square. And that's because I needed to be 4 1/4 for this piece. And so I've got this kind of leftover section that I can use, again, in something else. So that goes into my bone pile. And then I've selected a topper, I've selected a pattern paper, and I've got to introduce some solids into all these makes, but this is kind of where I'm going with everything. And then over here, what I did is I've got that one, I'm going to do a little cutaway, and so that piece is orientated the same way as this. Actually, I trimmed off just a little strip here to kind of fit into my 6 1/2 by 4 1/2 inch card. Picked a topper, picked another pattern paper. And then lastly, I just completed a video on a shelf structure. And I thought this would be great for that, because this piece, of course, was up over here. And so I'm going to use that for the arm on my shelf structure. And you haven't seen that yet. It's a great structure. And I split off a top portion here to do on the shelf piece. So that's going to hang here. Of course, I've got to introduce a couple solids, couple embellishments, but instead of coming back in between each piece, I'll hopefully show you some progression photos, but then I'll be back with the finished set. So you saw the finished pieces kind of close up, but kind of the same deal. So figured out I have a cutting die that works with all these different patterns, and this is a generic, it's actually a nested 3-piece kind of generic lacy border that works with this, and so I used it actually across all my 3 pieces. So once I found something, I went with it. Notice my stepper. Then when I've got a busy pattern or a busy card front, I like to add more busy, and so that's why I've got bows and buttons, again, kind of coming across. And actually, if you go back to that second finished piece, this one, which is that shelf card, I didn't have that button on there, but just to make it a cohesive collection, I added it. Of course, when I've got a cutaway, I like to add a lot of depth over in here because I've got space for it. I got my card front. If I were to do it over again, I'd probably raise this up just to give this a little more protection. And so I talked about the cutting dies. I used some Stampin' Up! Cardstock, Stampin' Up! Buttons and bows, and then just some generic out of my stash bow that just kind of went with this, and some buttons from Paper Wishes. And so I want to talk about this piece a little bit because I want to go back to the map. Let me zoom in just a little bit. I think that's in no, okay. I think that's in focus. And so if you want to, you could take your map, because if you prefer not working in square, because that 5 1/4 inch square is pretty much for that, and maybe you liked this design to use in the future, I just penciled in a couple lines with what I did, and this way it's kind of a tickler into the future of using this map again. So I've got one more set to look at, or one more set prep to look at, and then I'll be back. Okay, first off, I know I have a lot of glare going on, but what I wanted to share is, first off, this is one of my favorite pieces of cardstock ever. It comes from Kanban, and so I don't want to waste a thing. And so I'm going to start, first off, by kind of fixing this dimension over here, because I want it to be 6.5 inches. So my first cut into this A4 is going to be 6.5. And then I want both these pieces to be at 4 inches, because I can use both these pieces much quicker if they're the same size and they fall into a dimension that is not difficult to use. So 6.5 by 4. And I've got this strip left over. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to get rid of that square that was over in this corner. And so I want to make this 4 1/4 inches. So I cut 4 1/4 inches from this side. I have this strip to use in something else. And then my last measurement was actually making this 6 3/4, because what I want to end up with, which I use most often, is a 4.5 by 7 inch card. So I know I can use these 3 panels pretty simply, no matter what kind of design is on them. Now also, I've got obvious direction here, and so I'm going to stick with that. And the only reason I cut this in 2 is because when you're paying attention to patterns, I don't want to cut through a set of words, and that's just my own pet peeve. But you could have just started and cut off here at 6 3/4. And so what I've done really is I tweaked that original map. Let me move in. I sketched out this little personalized map. Like I said, I'm kind of fixing the things that I want to use to make 3 4.5 by 7 inch cards. And so this is a great way to split up, like I said, one of my favorite pieces of cardstock. And so once again, first off, I came from the right and cut 6.5 inches, came up 4 and 4, so I've got 2 4 by 6.5 inch panels. And then I came from the left, measured 4 1/4 by 6 3/4. Actually, like I said, I split it because of pattern, but I'm left over with a piece up here and a piece up here, and I know I can use this in my card making a lot more than maybe this first piece. But anyway, I keep these patterns because, like I said, they make card making really quick and easy. I'm going to go ahead and finish these up using kind of Christmas cluster designs. So adding Christmas icons to this. If you haven't seen that video, that's a great little design video that makes up cards really quick. Whether you're using cardstock or your own pattern papers. Anyway, I hope you took something you can use in your own card making, and I thank you for watching.